From West Virginia Public Broadcasting, this is Us and Them, the show where we tell stories from America's culture divides. I'm Trey Kay. Today, the opioid epidemic. According to the National Center for Health Statistics, in the last 2 years, 2 million people misused prescription opioids for the first time. Some of them were just curious kids.
I found them in my mom's medicine cabinet.
And before long, they're experimenting with substances doctors don't prescribe.
I just wanted to try heroin to see what all the fuss and how people got addicted on the first try, which I found out that day, absolutely.
And as we'll hear, addiction often becomes a family affair, whether the family is up for it or not.
Are the drug companies at fault for the opioid epidemic?
It's a business plan. It's a business plan. They can say what they want to. You can't send 9 million pills to Kermit, West Virginia with 392 people and tell me you didn't have a business plan.
That's West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin speaking with MSNBC's Casey Hunt about the opioid epidemic that has devastated West Virginia. He's referring to reporting done by the Charleston Gazette-Mail, reporting honored with a Pulitzer Prize, by the way, that showed how drug wholesalers flooded 780 million hydrocodone and oxycodone pills into West Virginia over 6 years.
You can't send the millions and millions and millions of pills they keep sending to West Virginia and not basically forcing something without a red flag going up. Something is wrong, Casey, and I'll tell you, we've got to change it.
The opioid epidemic has seriously impacted our state's workforce, economy, and health. The saturation of prescription pills, combined with an alarming rise in heroin use, has put West Virginia at the top of several national health lists that we'd rather not be on. But the most troubling statistic? Since 2010, West Virginia has led the nation's opioid overdose death rate. This dubious distinction prompted a visit from President Obama back in 2015.
There's no us and they here. There's no us and them. This is all of us in every school, in every community, in every neighborhood, and it could be your child.
And it's not just West Virginia's communities, neighborhoods, and children impacted by this scourge. This problem is nationwide. New Hampshire is also high on this list, with an appallingly high overdose death rate. Earlier this year, President Trump visited the Granite State to address the nation's opioid epidemic.
Every day, 116 Americans die from an opioid-related overdose. In New Hampshire, the overdose death rate, can you believe this? The death rate is double the national average. It's got difficulties like people wouldn't believe. Defeating this epidemic will require the commitment of every state, local, and federal agency. Failure is not an option. Addiction is not our future.
The Us and Them team has been tracking America's pernicious opioid problem, and particularly the problem in New Hampshire. Back in 2016, we visited a young man in New Hampshire who'd been battling an opioid addiction and was trying to stay clean. My co-producer, Mitch Hanley, went on a car ride with him and his dad.
Where are we going?
Haverhill. We're going to Haverhill to check in with my case manager so she can see how I've been doing and to take a drug screening.
I asked Mitch to tell me about his experience with this guy. Hey, Mitch.
Hey, Trey.
So who is this guy you followed?
He didn't want to use his real name, so let's call him Steve. And he's from a small town in New Hampshire. Last August, he got busted on heroin possession in Massachusetts and was recommended for a drug diversion program. I spoke with Steve and his dad on their car ride to his pee in a cup session. He told me about how he came upon opiates as a teenager.
When I was 16 is when I first tried painkillers. It was the Oxycodone 5 milligram tablets. I found them in my mom's medicine cabinet when I was getting Tylenol one day, and just really wanted to see what the big deal with them was. So, I decided to take a couple and save them for school the next day. I had midterms. And prior to going to class, I took the 3 pills and, waited about 15 minutes before I started noticing any effects. And I started liking, the way they made me feel. But not even an hour later, I got ill because I had taken too much for that being a first-time dose.
And did you think it was going to be a performance-enhancing drug?
I did. I kind of did. I figured it would have relaxed me, mellowed me out and allowed me to focus. And so that's what I was expecting, but I had no idea that it was going to make me ill like that.
When was this? And how old was Steve at the time?
This was back in 2011, and Steve was 16.
And I understand that sometimes teenage substance abusers learn their behavior from their parents. I mean, was this a case where either his mom or dad had a substance abuse problem?
No, actually, these oxycodone pills were from Steve's mom, who had recently undergone hip surgery. And but when Steve saw them, he told me his adventurous, "I'll try anything" spirit kicked in.
I just heard from kids getting surgery, from getting wisdom teeth taken out, and that they were this drug that made you feel really good and you could just relax on and just kind of vibe out. And that's what I was, looking for.
What did you know about the downsides of this at that time?
I never really knew that it was just like heroin in a pill form. I never knew any of that stuff. I just kind of looked at it like it was prescribed by a doctor, what could be the harm in it. Just like that's how I thought about Xanax and Klonopin and other drugs that I took before trying to get high.
Before this, what was the attraction to just general experimentation? You were just curious?
Absolutely. It was a cocky attitude stage that you can try most of these things and not get addicted to them whatsoever.
So you did your midterms and you got sick and you were like, okay, maybe I took too many, I'll try it again. Tell me about that experience.
So, I looked at it like, maybe, I just wasn't used to them. The more and more I kept doing them, I got used to the effects and it would no longer make me nauseous, so I would just be high for hours without having any negative effects whatsoever. And then when the drug wore off, there was no come down, there was no burnout feeling like after you smoke a bunch of weed, there was none of that, or no hangover like when you drink. So it was just like getting high at that point.
Mitch, a lot of teenagers experiment with alcohol and drugs, and often without many consequences. But I wonder when Steve figured out that he was in over his head.
Steve realized he had a problem and actually told his sister he was addicted to painkillers. She told their parents, and he went through a treatment program heading into his senior year and was effectively clean. Later that year, he started working for his sister's husband doing construction. But his brother-in-law actually became, in his words, his partner in crime.
I could still get high on oxycodone. I just wanted to try heroin to see what was the big deal about it, to see what all the fuss and how people so-called got addicted on the first try, which I found out that day, absolutely.
Yeah, around this time, about 2 weeks after he graduated from high school, this brother-in-law helped Steve cross over from prescription opiates to street heroin.
I was watching his son, and he came over, and he told me at that point that he could get it, but it was going to cost $100. So I gave him the $100, and I stayed home watching his kid while he went out and bought it, and then he came back and picked me up, and then we drove to a gas station, and I snorted my first line, and it was almost like an epiphany, like, what have I done, and because I knew right away I was in trouble because of how much I liked it. The next day, I felt like the scum of the world. I felt like complete garbage because once the high wore off, you realize like what you just did, and you think about what society has taught you what these heroin users are like. So immediately you start comparing yourself to what those people, and it just makes you feel like junk. And I felt like I'd stepped down in society in a sense, because most people, I thought, with a level-headed shoulder, head on their shoulders, would not ever think about trying heroin. So, but I took that step, and it made me feel awful. But the thing is, that only lasted for about a day, and then the next day I was already texting my brother-in-law, like, hey, when can we get that stuff again?
Before long, Steve's dad, Frank, that's not his real name either, was getting hip to what was going on.
We didn't think he had a serious problem. We just thought it was like a recreational thing because, unfortunately, it seemed like, that's what all the kids were doing in high school. It bothered us, but not as much as when we found out more was going on. Well, a lot of the things that we started picking up is tired a lot, sleeping, laying in bed. Then their face gets droopy because they're so relaxed and zoned out that they don't realize it. Then they find themselves nodding off, bobbing for apples, and waking themselves up. I mean, my son-in-law one time almost fell face first in his Thanksgiving meal. I mean, that's how they get. It wasn't up until, like I said, later after we've seen it more, and then my daughter went through her separation, with her husband because of it. That's when we started figuring out that my son was probably on it too, and that's when we started picking it up. So one time I did call up my son-in-law, and he had told us, he says, yeah, he goes, he's getting high. He finally confirmed what we had our suspicions on.
Now, just to be clear, the son-in-law confirmed to Frank that Steve had been using. Is that right?
That's right. And Frank says he felt powerless in intervening in his son's drug problem. He actually told me one time when Steve was in the shower, clearly strung out on heroin, he tried to call the cops to take his son to jail. But the cops told him that there's no law against being high in your own house. And, as Frank said, his daughter separated from her husband. At that point, Steve also stopped working for his sister's ex. So Frank, he's a professional plumber. He hired Steve to work with him. This was partly so he could keep an eye on his son. But Steve, told me he'd get his paycheck, pay his bills, and then go get high with his partner in crime, his ex-brother-in-law.
When you do something wrong like that, you don't want to be alone. You want someone, that's going through what you're going through, so you don't feel so isolated and such a loser in a sense. So I'm going to use with him so I don't feel like I'm the only one that uses drugs.
Eventually, Steve was asking his dad for advances on his paycheck. But things got worse as the addiction continued to consume him.
His money was always gone when he's working. I just found out that, like I said, I was supporting his drug habit. There were times where I had to go where I thought we were getting clean. He owed his dealer $300. I drove, I paid, and it's like, look, this is it, Okay, you gotta get clean, this and that. But finding out what they do from us going to parent meetings on this, me and my wife, that they tell you what you want to hear. Not that they ever have intentions of getting clean, and that's what they're good at. They're the biggest liars you'll ever meet in your life.
So his dad paid off his debt to his dealer? Was Steve still in some sort of treatment program at this time?
Steve says that he wanted to get clean, but he just couldn't. And so last summer, he began a Suboxone treatment program. And Suboxone is kind of like methadone. It's an opioid replacement therapy, which basically blocks the effects of taking opiates. The program required that Steve meet with a therapist and successfully pass 3 drug screenings.
How did he do?
Well, the bad news was that Steve failed all 3 urine tests, testing positive for opiates, and was kicked out of the program. He went to his last therapist appointment August 26th, 2015, and just as a heads up, at this point in the recording, you can really hear the rain coming down.
Saw my therapist in Manchester, and I got my paycheck. It was a Wednesday, so I wanted to go get high after. I drove down to Lawrence like I did on most occasions, as I was pulling into the plaza, and I met up with my guy and, going to buy my drugs in one of the stores, he said, there's police here in the parking lot, we got to go to the other store. So I saw the cops arresting somebody. They were narcotics officers. And I met him at the Family Dollar. I got my stuff. I left. And I drove to the Taco Bell right across the street. Not even thinking about the cops, that were right across the street. And I started setting up my stuff to do a shot.
What does that look like?
I had a bottle of water in my car. I took the cap off the Dasani bottle. I sucked up some water. I opened the bag, dumped some in the cap, squirted the water in, and I was mixing it up. And it was, I had the cotton ready to drop in the water. And at that point, I saw out of the corner of my eyes two guys with guns pointed at me walking up to the car. And right there, I knew I was busted.
Dang.
Yeah. What Steve didn't know was that there was a massive narcotics sting called Operation Cold Turkey going on. And police from a few different towns in Massachusetts arrested more than 250 people over July and August of last year. And the officers actually told Steve how they spotted him.
Oh, there's a kid with New Hampshire plates, looking down in his lap, parked, guarantee he's shooting dope. I was just so focused on what was in front of me. I had no idea they were sneaking up on me. I had no idea they even pulled in the parking lot. Like they said, if you're young and you're white, you really have no business being, in Lawrence by yourself, especially if you're just sitting in the parking lot. They were shocked that, because usually they're used to seeing white kids, but most of the, kids they deal with, like you can tell, haven't showered in, so many days. They stink, their cars are a mess. Almost like a shock to them to see, like, someone that looked like people they do business with,
Here's Steve's dad, Frank.
It was a shock in the beginning, but I can't say I was surprised, because it's, it's just a matter of time, or something. Either he kills himself or he gets caught. Every parent fears that they're going to get that call that, their kid died of overdose,
So in some ways this was a relief?
Yeah, it was.
Well, how did it work out? I mean, did they throw the book at Steve in Massachusetts?
Because this was his first offense, the prosecutor offered him a deal. If Steve successfully completed a drug diversion program, the charges would be dropped and his record cleared. So he needs to complete this program successfully, or the charges could be brought back up against him. And, he's committed to it. And that's where we are today, 6 months later. Here's Steve literally walking into the place where he'll pee in a cup.
Well, I'm glad this is my last day, but I tend to get a little nervous. I tend to get a little, stage fright. Yeah, 6 months. Time goes by fast. All right.
Good luck.
Thank you.
And when that was all done, I rode back to New Hampshire with Steve and his dad.
That's all set.
Steve told me that the diversion program has helped keep him clean and that he's a little nervous about going forward without the safety net of that program. Steve's very aware of heroin's potential to still overpower him.
Do you still crave heroin?
I do. It's not like a daily thing like it was. Certain things will trigger me, whether it be locations that I've used at, or just hearing about it a lot, or seeing it, or on TV or whatnot. I feel like to not get cravings, that's not really possible, especially for the first at least couple years of recovery, but it's just how easy they get to control, and it's almost like tearing a muscle. It'll tear and then it'll grow back stronger. So it's every time you say no to a really, really tough craving, it gets easier and easier with every single time you say no. So it's getting easier, but there's definitely times I still crave heroin.
Now the true test comes, I guess. Okay, this is something he had to do, whether he wanted to or not. He had to do it or could face charges and maybe some jail time. Now, 6 months down the road again, I mean, is he still clean? Now is he back on drugs because the program's over and you don't have to have any tests weekly or meet anybody weekly? This is the true test, my opinion. You know, I always knew he was a smart kid. He had a good head on his shoulders. I mean, he's not. A lot of people are telling me, you know, even in work, inspectors are telling me that you got a smart kid there. You know, he's something that could take over the business and make it successful. You know, through the whole process, I've learned a lot going through this with him. That, you know, people with addictions aren't losers. They're just people who are in bad situations and need help. You know,
Even if addicts are not losers, Frank still struggles with how law enforcement and parents like him can effectively help addicts.
It boils down to they got to come up with a strict law against heroin use, and whether they're
Heroin use or heroin distribution. Heroin use isn't a crime.
I'm just saying,
You're
you
only
get
hurting
no,
yourself.
no, it is a crime. It's killing people. Heroin use.
Heroin distribution is killing people. Using heroin is your own problem.
It doesn't matter.
It's something. It's a choice you make at the end of the day.
I don't
Whether
care.
you choose to heroin, who does that affect besides
That's
the
not
person
the problem.
choosing
It's
to
killing
do
these
it?
people. They want to get clean, but
they
can't.
know the risk status.
But you knew the risk and you kept doing it. This is turning into an argument.
It is going to turn into an argument.
I say that they need these people, kids that are using. They want to get off, but they have no resources to go and get off.
So which is where we need the government's help.
I'm just trying to say they need a program.
But you just said
they can
said heroin use in general should be treated like a huge criminal act.
People who are addicted to heroin or who are using
should not be treated as criminals.
Who wanted to get off heroin, but they need to have something again. They're not going to willingly go to a program if they don't. I even asked you today, if you did not get arrested, would you be off program? And you said no. So they need to be arrested. They know they need to be facing jail time.
Jail time does not fix anything. No, all jail time does is it delays the inevitable. All it does.
Let me ask you this, okay? Again, you feared going to jail, and
but
you
that's
were all
not
set with
everybody.
that.
How many?
Exactly. I'm not saying it's everybody, but if it helped 5 out of 10 people, it
doesn't
helped.
help. I know.
In the months following Steve's graduation from the treatment program in Haverhill, Massachusetts, he worked hard to stay clean. He was really dedicated to it. At one point, he tore his knee out at work, and when he went to the hospital, he stayed away from pain medication. After a break, we'll check in with Steve's progress.
He had his nights where he said he had, smoked some pot or had a few beers, smoked some pot. So to say he was 100% clean, I can't say that.
I'm Trey Kay, and you're listening to Us and Them, which is supported in part by the West Virginia Humanities Council, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation. We'll be back in a minute.
In difficult times, music gives us peace, brings us together, and helps heal us. It calms our nerves and brightens our days. That's why we're bringing you classic episodes of Mountain Stage on air and in our podcast. This is Larry Gross, host of Mountain Stage. Find something that's familiar or brand new and feel the power of live music on our website, mountainstage.org.
Over the next several months, my partner Mitch Hanley kept checking in with Steve. Why? Well, because we'd heard a lot of heroin recovery stories, and we knew that frequently there are lots of twists and turns and bouts with relapse. Usually when we'd call his cell phone, you'd hear a recording of one of Vivaldi's Four Seasons until he picked up. But after a while, we started to notice that we were hearing a normal phone ring, but he never seemed to pick up. Eventually, when we called, it just rang busy. And after checking to confirm that we had the right number, we tried a few more times. Still, just a busy signal. Now, before we interviewed Steve, he expressed some concern that his drug addiction might be a shadow on his dad's plumbing business. So we agreed to use a pseudonym for him and his dad, Steve and Frank. But we knew Steve's real name. and reluctantly decided to check the obituaries. According to the Manchester Union leader, David DJ Favreau, 22, of Hooksett, New Hampshire, died unexpectedly at his residence on January 31st, 2017. Dying unexpectedly can mean a lot of things. First and foremost, a tragedy. But at this point, Mitch and I did not know for sure if the death was due to an overdose. Reading an obituary from months before really doesn't blunt the shock and grief, especially when the victim is so young, and when you had such hope for their progress. So, Mitch, after you found his obituary, what happened next?
It was early July, and I called up his dad, Dave Sr., and he and his wife, Cheryl, remembered the original interview and agreed to another one. Cheryl said in an email that, maybe this would help us heal. So on a Sunday afternoon, I drove up to Hooksett, New Hampshire.
It's near Manchester, right?
Yeah, just outside of Manchester. I sat down in Dave and Cheryl's kitchen. I asked them what happened since our last interview. As far as they knew, DJ, they call him Deej, had been clean for most of the summer of 16.
He had his nights where he said he had, smoked some pot or had a few beers, smoked some pot. So to say he was 100% clean, I can't say that. But, the signs were definitely not there, like they used to be.
Now, you might ask, why is he using any drugs or alcohol if he's trying to kick his drug habit? Isn't that just going to make it harder?
Well, you're right. I was going to ask you about that. Why?
Yeah, the sense I got from Dave and Cheryl, they said they knew that he was going to do what he wanted to do, and they weren't going to be able to chaperone him everywhere and control what he did. So it seemed to me like they were more concerned with the drugs that might kill him, the fentanyl, the heroin, and later market drugs.
So when we spoke with him in the spring of 2016, he'd completed rehab. So how did the subsequent months go?
Well, this is where it gets a little scary. Dave and Cheryl told me it was late August, and he was driving down in Salem, Massachusetts, and according to an off-duty policeman who was following him, DJ's car was swerving across the lanes, bouncing off guardrails, and he eventually crashed into some boulder, and his car launched like 50 feet into the air. He rolled a few times, and when it finally stopped...
DJ got out of the car, and he dropped. And they had to revive him then with fentanyl.
With fentanyl or Narcan?
Narcan, sorry. But I think he took fentanyl.
That's when he, like you said, as he called it, we always have a relapse here and there. So he had a relapse, and he ended up getting into a car accident, screwed up his back, and stuff like that. So at that point...
I think it scared him.
I think that scared him, and he was doing good again. We had him clean again for a while. He was real optimistic.
So it seems like DJ fell into a pattern that a lot of addicts find themselves in. They start with a prescription drug like Oxycodone, move on to heroin, and then harder, more dangerous fentanyl. But you spoke with DJ, right? And he didn't tell you about any of this?
Yeah, I called him up in October, I think, but he didn't mention any car accident. And I guess, overdosing on fentanyl wasn't something he wanted to tell me about. But he did tell me he wasn't working because of a knee injury.
Yeah, he was horsing around with one of the guys at work who was a little bigger than him, and they were doing a little wrestling thing, trying to put each other down onto the ground, and he just
popped the knee.
I wasn't there on the job when it happened, so I don't know.
So what then happened?
Well, then they called the ambulance, and ambulance claimed, and I finally, put there, and yeah, you could see he was in a lot of pain, and his knee was onto the side of his leg and stuff, and I just looked at the guy that was treating him and stuff. I said, hey, don't give him any pain medicine. He's a drug addict. Okay. And he gave me the look like, thanks a lot, Dad. So.
But when I talked to him on the phone after that, he was proud of that, not using painkillers.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. For a while, there was a spell. He was good. As far as we knew, if there was any any lapse or anything like that. It was something that we never noticed, so he'd done it discreetly. I mean, when he was really on it, I mean, he would come home and you could tell he was screwed up, you know?
Yeah, see, his eyes here, you can tell he wasn't high. I could always tell by his eyes. I go, you're high, aren't you? No. I go, don't lie to me, Deej. I go, I used to be on them. I know what your eyes look like. Sure enough, mothers know.
Yeah, they do.
They do.
So, I'm confused. Give me a sense of the timing here. This is in the fall after his car accident and after the knee injury?
Yeah, DJ was working with his dad, a plumber, and he had one more year of plumbing school before sitting for his journeyman license. And he was clean. He was motivated.
So, it sounds like he was doing really well.
Yeah, exactly.
So what happened?
Well, that Sunday in late January before he died, the family spent the day at Wells Beach up in Maine. They had a great time, but something was bothering DJ. He seemed agitated.
We had a grand time, came home. It was about 5 o'clock. He was very edgy. And he goes, what's the matter? What's the matter? He goes, I gotta go out. Okay. So, DJ came home that night after 9 o'clock. That night, he's sitting on the couch, days later there. DJ's eyes were going up in his head. I'm going, oh my God, Dave. I go, his eyes are rolling in his head. He took something. And Dave got up and he went, DJ. And he hit him 3 times to get him out of whatever he took.
God, this just sounds so scary.
Yeah, it was. The next day, Monday, DJ goes to work with his dad like any day. That evening, he had a big test at plumbing school, which he did pretty well on. He got a 94. And when he got home...
Comes over to me and I'm sitting in that chair and he gives me the biggest hug. He goes, night, Mom. Kisses me. I love you. Goes, thanks for the good supper. And I look at him, I'm going, like, you're weird, you know? Walks away. He looks at Dave. He's laying on the couch. He goes, night, Dad. I love you too. Before we went to bed at 10:30, we smelled something funny. He did, coming from his room. We usually always go in his room and check on him before we go to bed. But he didn't want to go in his room and start arguing and fighting. And usually I go up around 11 and I usually go in to see him, but I didn't.
The next morning...
And it was around 6 o'clock, and usually I sat here on the couch and I call him. And his phone would ring. And he didn't answer. So I'm saying to myself, now I got to go upstairs and wake him up because he wasn't answering his phone.
See, you call him
wherever
he is in the house.
Yeah, he's in his bedroom sleeping, so I would be down here. I pick up my cell phone.
Yelling, you know,
I pick up my cell phone, so I call him up. Then I can kind of hear him, the bed creaking upstairs, rolling over. Hello? I go, come on, time to get up. No, it's like, yes, now, but after he didn't answer, I said, all right, well, I guess I got to go upstairs and wake up. So I went upstairs, opened his door, cracked the door open, it's dark in there, and I'm like, hey, let's go, time to get up. Still no response, and then I turned his light on, and he was crouched down in his bed, and he was already like blackish blue, gray, and stuff like that. I started yelling to my wife, "Oh my God, he's dead!" No,
you went, "Oh my God, he's dead."
Just, well, I ain't gonna say the effing word here, but I just, like I said, I started like punching him. I don't know why, but I started punching him like to wake up. No, you were hugging
him, going, DJ, why did you do this?
So she called 911. And,
that's when
they told me to get him off the bed, so I'm trying to get him off the bed, but he was already, like, stiff. Rigor mortis started sitting it. I got him off the bed. My brother-in-law helped, and they wanted me to give him mouth-to-mouth, and it's like, in the meantime, I'm yelling, he's dead, so why?
Everything was like, I don't know, like a dream, because usually we know when somebody's gray and all puffed up, it's usually they've been gone for a while. But when you're a parent and your kid is in his room, you don't think of these things. You want your child back.
So she goes, well, start giving chest compressions. The paramedics, lucky they were only across the street, but I was giving him chest compressions, and, I'm just yelling, come on, DJ, wake up. And he didn't.
Yeah, but I remember when I went in the room, who's dead? And you went, DJ's dead. And I went in there. You were hugging him, DJ. Yeah. Don't do this to me. Don't do this to me, DJ. Don't do this to me. And you were hugging him. That's what I see.
Yeah. So then the paramedics came and they took it, took over.
No, they threw us out of the room and we couldn't see him since.
And then that was it.
And then when he was in his casket, I
took him
crawled
away.
in it with him.
You crawled in the casket with him.
Of course I did.
Yeah.
He was my baby. I was playing with his hair, and he's telling me to leave him alone. Leave his hair alone. I go, why? He didn't even let me touch it when he was alive. It's just, I miss him, and he looked so peaceful. He had his lips open a little bit. He was such a good boy.
We had an open
I
casket.
told Dave, I said, no, I want to bury him like people seeing him in his flannel shirt, his baseball hat, and that's how
Yeah, we didn't
did
put
it.
him in a suit or anything.
I
his
refused
work
to.
clothes,
His work clothes,
flannel
yeah.
shirt, his hat that everybody, women.
That hat.
Yeah.
Yep.
Was it a Cowboys hat or a Penguins
No, it was
hat?
Pittsburgh Penguins. It was
Pittsburgh Penguins.
So I understand a lot of the community came out for DJ's funeral.
Yeah, Cheryl told me that over 200 people turned out to say goodbye. And these were his friends, classmates, teachers, even some town officials.
And I imagine that it was incredibly sad since DJ was so young and everyone thought that he'd turn things around.
Yeah, exactly.
I have his obituary right here, and it reads, DJ was a talented, kind-hearted, good-natured, and lovable young man. He was a jokester and found great pleasure in picking on his sisters.
Yeah, apparently he had a great sense of humor.
Tell me what he wanted to do with the business when he took it over.
He wanted to implement a 1 hour nap time after lunch.
He's not going to have trouble getting people to
I'm
work
like,
for him.
okay, is it a paid nap time or is it unpaid?
What time was the hours?
Lunch would have been 11:30 to 12, and 12 to 1 is company nap time.
I told you he was a prankster.
So, Mitch, how much do you think that Cheryl and Dave replay the events of the night that DJ OD'd?
I think they actually think about it quite a bit, especially Dave. You remember Dave said he smelled something funny outside DJ's room that night?
Yeah.
Well, he ignored it. He just wasn't up for another confrontation with him. I think the reality here is that, trying to be on your guard 24/7 with an addict, it can be exhausting.
Yeah.
But I'm like, you know what? It was like, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to really get into a fight. I'm like, so I just kind of because I was tired. I just want to go up and go to bed. And I just walked by and blew it off and went to bed. Every day I wonder, time of death is estimated at 12. What if I would have barged in around 10:30 at night? Would I have been caught him in the middle of doing something? And could I have saved him? Yeah, I got to live with that the rest of my life.
But at the same time, all day long we avert tragedies that we don't know about because they don't happen,
Yeah.
So you can't take credit for the tragedies that don't happen, but you also can't take responsibilities for the tragedies.
Well, that's what people say. Like you said, even if, we would have barged in and we would have caught him, and so we would have saved him this time, what about the next time?
I was talking to my neighbor across the street this morning, actually, and their son struggles with addiction. And I said to her, it seems to me like an impossible situation when you always have to wonder
If he's going to be alive.
if he's going to be alive, or if you're doing everything that you can to keep them alive. And she said, it's what I do every day. I text him in the morning, "Hi, how are you?" And she waits with bated breath until he replies.
Sounds familiar.
And what also sounds familiar from what you just said is that he has no idea what he's putting her through. That she is constantly on edge. And I just wonder, how do you ever get peace?
You don't.
You don't.
You don't.
As the opioid scourge plays out, the big question before state and federal government and local communities is, how do we address this insidious epidemic? And the answer tends to lie somewhere between two poles. This is a law enforcement problem and we've got to be tough approach. And this is a sick person and they have a disease and we have to be compassionate approach. We heard DJ and his dad arguing over these positions earlier in the episode.
I even asked you today, if you did not get arrested, would you be off probation? And you said no. So they need to be arrested. They know they need to be facing jail time.
Jail time does not fix anything. No, all jail time do is...
This is for another show, I guess. We could set up another show and argue with the point.
No, all jail time does is it delays the inevitable. All it does
Let me ask you this, okay? Again, you feared going to jail and you were all set with that.
But that's not everybody. How many...
Exactly. I'm not saying it's everybody.
I listened to that argument me and DJ had, and it's like, I understand what he's saying. They're the victims. These kids can't help themselves. They go, they get drugged, they get Narcan, they come back, and they do it again. And they know who the repeat offenders are. These kids just can't help it. And it goes back to saying, you overdose, you Narcan, automatically 90 days in jail. After that, a 90-day... I just think that's the answer. I think that's the only answer.
No.
Because these kids aren't gonna go and stop. They can't.
Right,
I learned that after 3 years of dealing with DJ. They can't stop.
But jail's not going to...
You have to force them.
No, you don't.
You have to force... Yes.
It's almost like you can't force a horse to drink water.
You have
to. You can't force a kid. Nope.
But eventually, when the horse realizes it's going to die, it will drink water. So
you mean to tell me, if your son ended up in jail, you would have him in jail with the rapists, the robbers? No, because that's where he would end up.
Okay, let's correct this. Make a facility, a place where it's not so much a prison. I don't know if you... Just someplace these kids have to go to now they got no choice but to be clean for 90 days.
But then what happened with these meetings we went to?
It's not going to help. It's not going to help.
Right, but these kids went to Florida to get out of Manchester from the drug thing for a whole year. They come out 3 days clean, and they're back on it.
Got to find something out. What they're doing now isn't the answer. That's all I'm saying.
But
they have to be harsher on them.
All right, we gave our son everything. We got him out of drug deals. We paid the money. We almost lost this house. We were like 2 months behind, and we would give everything just to keep our son alive. And we're not the only ones, because my neighbor across the street went through the same thing with her son, and they found him passed away dead down the road here in Hooksett. Now she threw him out, so now she's living with the guilt. So, see, a lot of parents think that because they can't deal with it, they think that throwing their kids out on the street, that's not doing it the answer either. Because if the kid passes away, now she's living with the guilt that maybe she shouldn't have done that. You know what I'm saying? It's really, really tough.
There's no one
right way, and there's no wrong way.
There's no answer.
There's no answer.
But even what they're doing now isn't the answer.
I never got tattoos, never believed in them, and I got this one with a mother and a son with the month he died, which is the carnation, the sweet pea is his birthday.
What does it say?
DJ in loving memory. DJ 4/29/94.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, the boy I always wanted because I have two beautiful girls.
Dave, is that a new tattoo?
Yeah, it's a cross with a ribbon around it. And it says, until we meet again on the top. Then in the cross, it has DJ. And then in the ribbon, it has in loving memory, 4/29/94. And to the day he died, 1/31/2017.
Did you guys have those done at the same time?
Yeah.
Yep.
We had them done right after he passed away.
Mitch, you showed me some photos that you took of Dave and Cheryl's tattoos. And just so our listeners know, you can see them posted on our website at usandthempodcast.com. So When you spoke with them back in July, it was almost, 6 months after DJ passed?
Yeah, and as you can imagine, it's still really hard. Cheryl says she cries every day, and Dave's not much better.
He has a tough time because he'll listen to his music. Like this morning. Every Sunday he does. And
What is it?
Rap. Eminem. I got Pandora, I'll put on. Sometimes I'm just sitting outside having coffee.
yeah, I come outside and he'll be crying. I wish he would have left a note, something. But like you said, he took everything with him.
Mitch, Dave and Cheryl said DJ seemed to be acting more sentimental than usual before he went up to bed the night he died. I mean, saying that, I love you, Mom, and I love you, Dad, which they thought was unusual for him. And then here you hear Cheryl say that she wishes that he'd left a note. I mean, was there any thought given to the possibility that DJ could have taken his own life?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it is something they'd thought about. But Dave spoke with a guy who used to work for him, somebody actually DJ used to get high with.
I asked him because I just kind of needed to know. And he had spent that Sunday night with him. He had said, no, he was happy, cheery. And he said he, just was in a good mood. He felt like getting high, and stuff. And, he told him that, I don't think I'll ever be 100% clean. He'll always tinker in it. But he said, he wasn't depressed, so he don't think it was suicide or anything like that. He just said just an unfortunate accident. He just got a bad batch or he couldn't take it for being clean. But he said he didn't confide in him in anything. And so they just hung out and had a good time and got high,
I'm reminded of something that DJ said in the car ride down to Massachusetts about how difficult those cravings were. You asked him if there were any particular triggers for craving heroin.
Not only does anger and feeling down add to a craving or whatnot, but also feeling really good about yourself and feeling really excited gives you cravings too. Because when you're in a good mood like that, you almost look at it like, oh, what would make this better, so there's not one specific mood I would put that gives you cravings or associate a specific mood with cravings, because anything from anger to guilt to depression to excitement to being just extremely happy, every single one of those moods gives me cravings if I'm in the wrong spot or in the wrong mindset at that time.
Wow, that sounds impossible.
Yeah. And one thing I want to point out in this segment, which I'm glad you mentioned, was when DJ says both feeling guilt and extremely happy can cause heroin cravings for him. Cheryl and Dave knew part of what he was struggling with was disappointing them.
That Monday morning, like that before he died, I said, DJ, don't think you're fooling anyone. I says, I know you were high Sunday. I said, you can sit there and tell me till you blew in the face you weren't. I says, but I know, and you could tell because he never would argue with me, but he would just smirk. And I know in the past he told me that he never would come out with it or anything like that because he didn't want, to disappoint me, It did hurt him. He wasn't proud to be hurting us. He didn't want to hurt us, but he knew he was hurting us.
Yeah, he knew he was hurting us and it was killing him. But he couldn't help himself. The only thing about DJ's death that I'm at peace with, I don't have to worry about my son coming home anymore, because now I know where he is and I know he can't touch this stuff ever again and nobody can hurt him. It's awful to say, but I miss my kid like hell. But at least I can say I know where he is and he's in peace.
New Hampshire's medical examiner's office concluded that David D.J. Favreau died as a result of ingesting a lethal dose of pure fentanyl. More than 72,000 Americans died of drug overdoses last year. As I was finishing this episode, I read this obituary for a young Vermont woman named Madeline Linsenmeyer, who'd battled opioid addiction for years. The obit was written by her family, and it really moved me. They wrote, "To some, Maddie was just a junkie. When they saw her addiction, they stopped seeing her. And what a loss for them. Because Maddie was hilarious and warm and fearless and resilient. She could and would talk to anyone. And when you were in her company, you wanted to stay." But when I read this phrase, "just a junkie," it feels like such a reduction to me. A simplistic, dismissive label to hang on a fellow human being. The thing is, opioid addiction is frighteningly complicated. Sure, there are some parts of the problem that require toughness and the strong arm of the law, like cracking down on the predatory tactics of drug companies and pill mills, and of course, rooting out the people who profit from selling street drugs. But other than that, I think people should be cautious with their judgment. Sure, we can all lament the moment a person has had their first encounter with an opioid. Was it a choice? Was it following doctor's orders? Was it like DJ, a curious kid experimenting? At some point, does it matter? The person is now sick and suffering and needs empathy and support. They need to feel more like us than them. You've been listening to Us and Them. For this show, our team was me, Trey Kay, Mitch Hanley, Loretta Williams, and Rima Snyder. Special thanks to the people at Project Cope, Nadia Cabana, Kristen Luongo, and Mark Kennard. They are the team that tried to help DJ recover. For more stories on opioid addiction in West Virginia, please go to wvpublic.org. Michael Lipton and Tristam Lozow wrote and performed the Us and Them show music. Mark Lerner designed our logo. The marvelous people at PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting make Us and Them possible. So do grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the West Virginia Humanities Council, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation. Us and Them was originally developed with the assistance from the Mentorship Program at AIR, the Association of Independents in Radio. We'll see you next time on Us and Them.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
From